The rhythm of Danielle Mercado's life was calibrated to the second, a precision born of necessity and honed into art. Her alarm chimed at 4:15 a.m., a gentle melody that pierced the pre-dawn darkness of her crew apartment in Dubai's Al Garhoud district. She silenced it with a practiced motion, her feet already finding the cool tile floor before consciousness fully claimed her. 28 years old, and already she moved with the economy of someone who understood that time was the most precious currency of all. The apartment was quiet, her roommate Leah on a long haul to Seoul. As Danny padded to the bathroom, splashing cool water on her face, the ritual that began every flight day for the past 6 years. The mirror reflected a face that betrayed no hint of the early hour. Dark, almond-shaped eyes clear and alert, high cheekbones catching the soft light, full lips set in the slight, perpetual smile that had become her professional signature. She gathered her straight black hair, securing it in a neat bun at the nape of her neck with skilled fingers that moved without conscious direction. The uniform of cabin crew, particularly for VIP and royal service, represents more than corporate branding, explains former Royal Fleet trainer Sophia Chun. It becomes a second skin, a physical embodiment of a role that demands absolute composure, attention to detail, and emotional regulation. For women like Danielle, the precision of appearance isn't vanity, it's armor. Danny's uniform hung on the bedroom door, freshly pressed the night before. A navy dress with full sleeves and a modest neckline, cut with an elegance that transcended standard airline attire. The insignia of elite air services, a stylized gold wing on the lapel, caught the light as she dressed, a small symbol of the rarefied world she inhabited, far from the sugar-cane fields of Bacolod where she had grown up. The fabric was cool and crisp against her skin, a constant tactile reminder of the life she had constructed through determination and quiet excellence. As she applied a touch of understated makeup, just enough to look polished without calling attention to itself, her eyes lingered on the silver band encircling her fourth finger. Marco had given it to her 3 years ago, on the Al Mamzar beach at sunrise, after they had worked the night shift at their respective jobs. It wasn't an extravagant ring. The diamond was small, the setting simple, but it represented a promise more valuable than the precious stones that regularly passed through the private terminal where she worked. Marco Reyes, 30, was a civil engineer working on the Dubai metro expansion. His days spent beneath the desert sun among concrete and steel. They had met during Danny's second year in Dubai, at a Filipino community gathering. He with calloused hands and architectural dreams, she with flight schedules and a determination to lift her family from the financial precarity that had shaped her childhood. Their love had grown slowly, built on shared values rather than passion's quick flame. Hard work, family loyalty, and the dream of a future secured through honest labor. Long-distance relationships among overseas workers often follow predictable patterns of dissolution, notes relationship psychologist Dr. Amina Al-Faisal. What made Danielle and Marco different was their intentional approach to building shared spaces despite separate careers. They weren't just planning a future together. They were creating small moments of connection in the present, a foundation strong enough to withstand the pressures of expatriate life. Danny's phone vibrated with a message as she fastened gold studs to her ears. Marco, already at his construction site, Ingat Mahal Ko. Stay safe today. She smiled, typing back, always. See you Friday. Love you. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, just enough time for a quick cup of jasmine tea before the crew shuttle arrived. As she waited for it to steep, she opened her laptop to scan the day's itinerary. Sheikh Khalid Al Nwami's private Gulfstream G700, Abu Dhabi to London, returning the following day. A routine flight she had staffed dozens of times over the past 2 years as part of the Sheikh's preferred cabin crew. Sheikh Khalid, 42, was the youngest brother of a senior royal, his portfolio including significant holdings in technology, healthcare, and real estate across Europe and North America. Unlike some of the VIPs she served, he had always been courteous, asking about her family, remembering her preference for photography, tipping generously at the end of each journey. His gifts: a Hermes scarf after a Paris trip, economy tickets for her parents to visit Dubai. She had accepted as professional courtesy, never encouragement. The line between service and subservience was one Dani navigated with quiet dignity. For Filipino workers in the Gulf, particularly those in close proximity service roles like flight attendants or household staff, professional boundaries become a complex negotiation, explains labor rights attorney Maria Santos. There's an unspoken expectation of deference that can easily blur into something more problematic. Women like Danielle develop sophisticated strategies for maintaining professionalism while deflecting unwanted attention. Strategies that become second nature, almost invisible to outside observers. The crew shuttle pulled up precisely at 5:30 a.m., the driver honking once as he did every morning. Dani gathered her small carry-on, packed with the efficiency of someone who lived perpetually between destinations, and locked the apartment door behind her. The pre-dawn air held the promise of another scorching day, the humidity already gathering like a weight. Inside the air-conditioned van, she exchanged quiet greetings with the other crew members, most still half asleep. She used the 40-minute drive to Zayed International Airport to mentally review the Sheikh's preferences. Evian water at room temperature, Financial Times and Al-Khalij newspapers, a particular Lebanese coffee blend served in small porcelain cups. The private terminal at AUH existed in a parallel reality to the main concourse where tourists and economy travelers jostled for space. Here, marble floors gleamed under subdued lighting, prayer rooms were appointed with hand-woven rugs, and the security procedures, though just as thorough, were conducted with discreet efficiency. Dani moved through the staff entrance with practiced ease, badging through secure doors until she reached the crew briefing room. Elite Air Services is proud to maintain the highest standards for our distinguished clients, the chief purser announced to the assembled crew, Dani and 2 male flight attendants, both Filipino as well. Sheikh Khaled has requested an additional stop in London this trip, a dinner with investors. The aircraft will remain at Luton overnight, with accommodations arranged at the Savoy for crew. As the briefing concluded, a text message appeared on Dani's phone, not from Marco, but from a number she recognized as belonging to Sheikh Khaled's personal assistant. The Sheikh requests your presence in the private lounge during the Abu Dhabi layover this evening. 8 p.m. formal dinner. Dani felt a small flutter of unease that in 2 years of flying with Sheikh Khaled. He had occasionally requested specific crew members for particular flights, but never a private meeting during a layover. The message existed in a gray area, not quite a work assignment, but coming through official channels. To refuse might jeopardize her position. To accept meant stepping beyond the carefully maintained boundaries of her professional role. This type of invitation represents a pivotal moment in the power dynamic, explains workplace psychologist Dr. Farid Nasser. It's deliberately ambiguous, professional enough to make refusal difficult, personal enough to shift the relationship. For someone in Danielle's position, with family dependence and visa status tied to employment, such moments become high-stakes decisions with no clear safe option. Dani hesitated, then typed a response that walked the diplomatic line she had perfected. Thank you for the invitation. I would be honored to attend in my capacity as cabin service director. The subtle emphasis on her professional role was intentional, a gentle reinforcement of boundaries. The reply came immediately. Car will collect you at 7:30 p.m. The flight itself proceeded with the clockwork precision that characterized elite air service. Sheikh Khaled arrived at the private terminal 10 minutes before scheduled departure, accompanied by his usual security detail and 2 business associates. He greeted Dani with the same courteous nod he always offered, showing no indication that anything out of the ordinary awaited that evening. As the Gulfstream cruised at 40,000 feet, Dani moved through the cabin with practiced grace, serving the custom menu prepared by the Sheikh's personal chef. The interior of the aircraft was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Cream leather seats, burled walnut tables, hand-woven carpets in muted geometric patterns. She knew every inch of the space, could navigate it blindfolded if necessary. The private jets of Gulf royalty represent more than transportation, notes luxury aviation consultant James Reynolds. They're extensions of personal identity and mobile embassies. The staff who operate these aircraft are not just service providers but guardians of reputation, expected to anticipate needs before they're expressed and solve problems before they materialize. The flight landed at Abu Dhabi just after 6 p.m., the Sheikh and his associates departing for meetings, while the crew completed their post-flight checks. Danny returned to the crew hotel on Yas Island with just enough time to shower and change before the car arrived. She selected a modest navy dress with 3/4 sleeves and a high neckline, professional enough for a work function, formal enough for dinner with a VIP client. Her hair remained in its neat bun, her makeup understated. The simple silver ring on her finger caught the light as she gathered her small clutch purse. The car, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, arrived precisely at 7:30 p.m., a suited driver opening the door without conversation. They drove not to the main terminal as she had expected, but to a separate building on the airport grounds, a low-slung structure of glass and steel with no external signage. The discreet Emirati guards at the entrance nodded at her approach, doors opening automatically into a space that few outside royal circles ever witnessed. The private dining room was intimate without being small, walls lined with illuminated panels of translucent alabaster, a table of polished olive wood set for two. Sheikh Khaled stood as she entered, gesturing toward the chair opposite his. A server appeared silently, pouring water into crystal glasses before disappearing through a hidden door. "Thank you for joining me, Danielle," the Sheikh said, his English perfect, the product of education at Oxford and Harvard. "I hope you don't mind the informal setting." "Not at all, Your Excellency," Danny replied, using the honorific appropriate to his position. "It's an honor to represent elite air services." The subtle reinforcement of her professional capacity seemed to amuse him. "Always so proper, so professional. That's what I've admired about you these past years." The meal unfolded with the precise choreography of high-level service. Rosewater-infused lamb, saffron rice, vegetables arranged like botanical art. The conversation remained safely within professional boundaries. The upcoming London meetings, changes to the aviation industry, her observations from years of elite service. If there was a purpose beyond professional courtesy, it remained veiled behind impeccable social graces. Until dessert was cleared, and Sheikh Khaled reached into his jacket pocket. "I have a proposition for you, Danielle," he said, his tone shifting subtly as he placed a small velvet box on the table between them. "One I hope you will consider carefully." The box sat like a black hole on the white tablecloth, bending the conversational light around it. Danny's hand, reaching for her water glass, froze mid-air. "I am in need of a wife," he continued, his voice matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business arrangement, which, she realized with sudden clarity, was exactly what this was. "Someone graceful, discreet, accomplished. Someone like you." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that made her simple silver band look like a child's toy in comparison. $5 million. A villa in your name. Your family taken care of for life. Your fiancé. He paused, eyes flicking to her silver ring. "Can keep his job, his visa. No one needs to know it's not love." The air seemed to crystallize around them, time suspended in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Danny felt a strange calm descend, the clarity that comes when a complex situation suddenly resolves into its simplest form. Her hands, which should have trembled, were perfectly steady as she removed her engagement ring, placing it on the tray beside the velvet box. "My love isn't for sale, Your Excellency," she said, her voice quiet but utterly firm. "And my fiancé isn't a footnote. He's the man I've chosen." She stood, smoothing her dress with the same habitual gesture she used before greeting passengers. "Thank you for the honor of your consideration. I must respectfully decline." The Sheikh's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a coldness entering where there had been certainty. "You should think carefully, Danielle. Opportunities like this don't come twice." "Some opportunities shouldn't come at all," she replied, the words emerging from a place of moral clarity that transcended fear. "Good evening, Your Excellency." She walked out, spine straight, steps measured, the same professional composure she had cultivated over years of service carrying her through the door, past the guards, into the waiting car. Only there, in the darkness behind tinted windows, did she allow herself to tremble, her hand reaching instinctively for the ring no longer on her finger. The silver band glinted under the passing lights, left behind on a white tablecloth beside a velvet box worth more than her entire life's earnings. A small, perfect symbol of everything she wasn't willing to surrender, even for $5 million. If you're finding this story of integrity in the face of impossible choices as compelling as I am, please take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, and the consequences of Danny's brave refusal will shake you to your core. The Crew Hotel on Yas Island was a study in anonymous luxury. Identical rooms in identical corridors, designed for transient occupancy and minimal attachment. Danny sat on the edge of the pristine bed, still in her navy dress, staring at the naked fourth finger of her left hand. The absence of her ring left a phantom pressure, a ghost sensation of the life she had just chosen over unimaginable wealth. Outside her window, the Ferrari World theme park glowed red against the night sky, its massive dome incongruously cheerful against the weight of decision pressing down on her shoulders. She needed to call Marco. The digital clock on the nightstand read 10:47 p.m. He would be home from his construction site, probably watching football highlights or preparing his lunch for tomorrow. His simple routine, the mundane architecture of an ordinary life, suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed, the international ring tones stretching between them like an umbilical cord connecting separate worlds. Mahal. His voice, warm with the slight accent of his Cebuano upbringing, immediately settled something in her chest. Everything okay? You're calling late. How to compress the evening's surreal proposition into words that wouldn't terrify him. She settled on the simplest truth. He asked me to choose. I chose us. A beat of silence as Marco absorbed the cryptic statement. Who asked you to choose what, Danny? She told him about the private dinner, the velvet box, the $5 million, the cold calculation in Sheikh Khalid's eyes. She told him about leaving her ring behind, a small act of defiance that now seemed both brave and foolish in equal measure. As the story unfolded, she heard Marco's breathing change, growing more controlled, more deliberate, the way it did when he was managing anger or fear. You walked away from $5 million, he said finally, his tone somewhere between awe and alarm. For this, for us. There was no choice to make, she replied, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised even her. What kind of life would that be? What kind of person would I become? Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, pride mingled with warning in his voice. I'm proud of you, Danny. You've always been the strongest person I know. But be careful. Men like him don't take no for an answer. Not from people like us. People like us, she repeated softly. The phrase encapsulated everything. Their status as overseas workers, their dependence on employment visas, the precarious economic tightrope they walked between opportunity and vulnerability. In the expatriate hierarchy of the Gulf, they occupied a middle-tier skilled professionals, respected for their expertise, but ultimately replaceable, their presence contingent on continued utility. Promise me you'll be careful, Marco insisted. Switch flights if you can. Don't be alone with him again. She promised, though they both knew her options were limited. Elite Air Services assigned crew based on client preferences, not employee comfort. To request a reassignment without clear evidence of impropriety would raise questions she couldn't afford to answer. Her family in Bacolod depended on her salary, her father's medication, her mother's small business, her younger brother's university tuition. The weight of those responsibilities sat heavy beside her newly recovered principles. The morning after such encounters reveals the true power differential at play, explains workplace safety expert Dr. Nadia Hussein. The powerful individual continues their life unchanged, while the person who refused them must suddenly navigate a minefield of potential consequences. Professional, financial, sometimes even physical. The courage required is not just in the moment of refusal, but in every moment that follows. Sleep eluded Danny that night, her mind replaying the Sheikh's expression as she placed her ring beside his velvet box. The look in his eyes hadn't been anger or even surprise. It had been something colder, a recalibration, as if she had suddenly transformed from a desirable asset into a problem requiring resolution. When dawn finally broke over Abu Dhabi, She felt hollowed out, running on adrenaline and determination as she donned her uniform for the return flight to London. The Sheikh and his associates boarded at the scheduled time, his manner toward her perfectly correct, betraying nothing of the previous night's proposal. If anything, he was more courteous than usual, his gaze never lingering, his requests channeled through his personal assistant rather than directly to her. The performance was flawless, a masterclass in aristocratic composure, and somehow more unsettling than overt hostility would have been. This apparent return to normalcy is itself a power play, notes criminal psychologist Dr. Jonathan Chun. It creates cognitive dissonance for the target, making them question their own perception of events, wonder if they've overreacted, or even begin to doubt their memory of the encounter. It's a sophisticated form of gaslighting that leaves the victim perpetually off balance. The return to Dubai brought subtle but unmistakable changes to Danny's professional landscape. Her flight assignments, once a predictable rotation of premium routes, were downgraded to shorter, less prestigious journeys. The chief purser, who had always praised her attention to detail, began finding minor issues with her service. A water glass not refilled promptly enough, a newspaper folded incorrectly, minute infractions that would never have warranted mention before. 3 days after the dinner, her supervisor called her into the office, his expression carefully neutral. "There's been some concern about your interactions with certain VIP clients," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Nothing formal, just whispers. You understand how delicate these relationships are, Danielle. How easily they can be damaged." The warning was clear, though couched in corporate euphemism. She was being watched. The boundaries of acceptable behavior had shifted beneath her feet, creating a quicksand of unspoken expectations. She maintained her composure, thanking him for the feedback with the same professional smile she offered to the most difficult passengers. But inside, a cold certainty was taking root. This was only the beginning. A week later, she opened her locker to find a small note, folded neatly on top of her spare uniform shoes. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message brief: "Some doors should stay closed. Others must be opened before they're slammed shut." No signature, no context, just the implicit threat hanging in the sterile air of the crew room. Anonymous intimidation serves multiple purposes in these scenarios, explains security consultant Rashid Al-Mansouri. Beyond the obvious intent to frighten, it creates an environment where the target never feels safe, never knows who might be watching or reporting back. Colleagues become potential threats. Workspaces become hostile territory. The psychological toll is immense, designed to wear down resistance over time. In the rarefied world Sheikh Khaled inhabited, the aftermath of Danny's refusal created ripples of a different kind. The Sheikh's cousin, Sheikha Layla Al-Nuaimi, sat across from him in the private study of his Saadiyat Island villa, her expression thoughtful as she considered the situation he had described. At 45, Layla was the family's strategic mind, her Harvard MBA and decade at Goldman Sachs making her the architect of their business empire's global expansion. "A flight attendant," she repeated, the words precise and faintly disapproving. "Filipino, engaged to an engineer, and you proposed—" "What exactly?" "An arrangement," Khaled replied, swirling the tea in his cup. "Mutually beneficial. $5 million for discretion and companionship." Layla sighed, placing her cup on the inlaid table with a soft click. And this seemed wise with the Saudi merger 2 months from closing? A merger where your image as a stable, grieving widower is central to investor confidence. The unspoken context hung between them. Khaled's wife had died 3 years earlier, her battle with leukemia transforming him in the eyes of the business community from a playboy prince to a sympathetic figure of dignified grief. This narrative had proven unexpectedly valuable, opening doors that had previously remained closed, particularly with the conservative Saudi family whose energy holdings they sought to acquire. "It was a miscalculation," he admitted, the closest he would come to acknowledging a mistake. "But a contained one." Layla's gaze sharpened. "Is it contained? You said she refused you publicly, left her ring as some dramatic gesture. What if she speaks about this? Posts on social media? Contacts a journalist?" The merger is worth $2 billion, Khaled. The family's reputation is worth more. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in Khaled's eyes. A glimpse of the temper he usually kept carefully leashed. She won't speak. She's smarter than that. Smart enough to refuse $5 million, Layla noted dryly, which suggests principles that might extend to speaking the truth, however inconvenient. She stood, smoothing her impeccable suit, Chanel, custom-tailored to accommodate both Islamic modesty and corporate power dressing. Make it disappear, Khaled. Quietly. No drama, no headlines, no complications. The Saudi deal closes in 8 weeks. After that, you can propose to whomever you wish. The dismissive wave of her hand reduced Dani from a woman of principle to a problem requiring resolution. A perspective that aligned perfectly with Khaled's own recalibration. He nodded, already reaching for his phone as his cousin departed. The call connected on the second ring. Rashid, he said to his head of security, a former intelligence officer whose discretion was matched only by his thoroughness. I need surveillance on an employee, Danielle Mercado, Elite Air Services. Half a world away from these machinations, Dani sat cross-legged on her bed in the crew apartment, her laptop open to a video call with her younger sister in Manila. Nina's face filled the screen, her expression shifting from delight at seeing her sister to concern as she registered the shadows beneath Dani's eyes, the tension in her usually relaxed posture. What's wrong, 8? Nina asked, using the honorific for elder sister. You look tired. Dani hesitated. To share the truth would be to transfer her burden of fear, to spread the contagion of anxiety to a family that already carried enough worries. But to remain silent was to face the growing shadow alone. She chose a middle path, a partial truth that might serve as protection without causing panic. I'm having some issues at work, she said carefully. Nothing serious yet, but if anything happens to me, Nina, it's because I said no to something I couldn't accept. I need you to know that. Nina's eyes widened, her university student's optimism giving way to the sharper awareness of a young woman who had grown up reading about overseas workers who disappeared, who were found dead in freezers, who returned home in caskets with unexplained injuries. 8, you're scaring me. What did you say no to? Who's threatening you? No one has threatened me, Dani clarified, though the note in her locker suggested otherwise. It's just a feeling, a precaution. She forced a smile. Probably nothing. But after the call ended, she opened the voice memo app on her phone, her finger hovering over the record button for a long moment before she pressed it. My name is Danielle Mercado, she began, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of what she was doing. I am a flight attendant with Elite Air Services in Dubai. On September 18, 2023, Sheikh Khaled Al-Nuaimi proposed marriage to me, offering $5 million for what would effectively be a contractual relationship. I refused. If anything happens to me after this recording, it is because of that refusal. She hesitated, then added, Marco, if you hear this, I kept my promise. I chose us. Always. She saved the file, encrypted it, and sent it to an email address only her sister could access. A digital breadcrumb, a trail leading back to truth if the worst should happen. Then she deleted the original from her phone, erasing the evidence while preserving its ghost in the digital ether. Outside her window, Dubai glittered with its characteristic promise. A city of opportunity, of reinvention, of dreams manifested in steel and glass. But as night settled over the skyline, Dani felt the weight of a different reality pressing down. The shadow ecosystem that existed beneath the gleaming surface, where power operated according to rules unwritten but universally understood. She had violated those rules, had dared to say no to a man unaccustomed to refusal. Now she would discover the price of that defiance. Across the city, in a nondescript office building in Jumeirah, Rashid reviewed the preliminary surveillance report on Danielle Mercado. Her routines were documented with clinical precision. Crew shuttle at 6 a.m., coffee at Al-Kawa at 7 a.m. on days off, calls to her fiancé every night at 9 p.m., grocery shopping on Thursdays, Filipino community gathering every second Sunday. A life of disciplined simplicity, its very predictability making it vulnerable. He set the report aside, reaching for his phone. The trap would need to be baited carefully, professional enough to compel compliance, urgent enough to bypass suspicion. He dialed the number he had procured through Elite Air's internal directory. "Ms. Mercado," he said when she answered, his voice carrying the easy authority of officialdom. "This is Omar from Human Resources. There's been an urgent uniform compliance review scheduled. Mandatory attendance. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Building C in Khalifa City. Your continued employment depends on your prompt arrival." The slight hesitation before her agreement told him she sensed something amiss. But like most expatriate workers, her options were limited by the fundamental equation of Gulf employment. Compliance or departure. She would come, and the machinery set in motion by her refusal would continue its inexorable operation, transforming a moment of moral clarity into a cautionary tale whispered among the invisible workforce that kept the Emirates running. If you think you understand where this story is heading, prepare yourself. The true horror of what happened to Danielle Mercado after she said no to one of the most powerful men in Abu Dhabi is only beginning to unfold. Subscribe now to follow the chilling chain of events that led to her disappearance, and the single silver ring that became the only proof she ever existed at all. Building C in Khalifa City existed in a curious liminal space, neither fully commercial nor entirely residential, a nondescript structure of sand-colored concrete with mirrored windows that reflected the harsh morning sun. Danny stepped out of the taxi at 9:52 a.m., 8 minutes before the appointed time, her uniform impeccable as always, a small notebook clutched in her hand. Her reflection fragmented across the facade as she approached the entrance, multiplying her into dozens of identical figures, all walking with the same purposeful stride that disguised the unease churning beneath her composed exterior. The lobby contained nothing to suggest deception. A reception desk staffed by a young Emirati woman in a black abaya, a security guard positioned discreetly by the elevator bank, potted palms in brass containers, providing the obligatory touch of corporate greenery. Danny approached the desk, her professional smile firmly in place. "Danielle Mercado," she said. "I have a meeting with Human Resources at 10 o'clock. The receptionist checked her computer, then nodded. "15th floor. They're expecting you." The elevator ascended with the silent efficiency of expensive machinery, numbers illuminating in sequence. 3, 4, 5, each floor bringing her closer to what her instincts increasingly warned might be something other than a routine uniform compliance review. Omar from Human Resources, a name she couldn't recall from any previous interactions, a department that typically communicated through official channels rather than personal phone calls. The architecture of deception often incorporates elements of legitimacy, explains security expert Michael Ramirez. A real building, a functioning elevator, a receptionist who believes she's directing visitors to genuine appointments. These authentic elements serve as cognitive anchors that override our natural suspicion. By the time inconsistencies become apparent, the target has already committed to a course of action that's difficult to reverse. The elevator doors opened on 15, revealing a corridor that seemed oddly quiet for a working business day. No ambient conversation, no ringing phones, none of the subtle soundscape of corporate activity. Just a single door at the end of the hallway, frosted glass bearing the etched words, "Human Resources, Elite Air Services." Danny hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. In the 6 years she had worked for Elite Air, she had visited their actual HR department countless times. In their headquarters on Sheikh Zayed Road, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that matched the company's premium brand positioning. Not here in this anonymous building in Khalifa City, miles from any of their official operations. But turning back now meant defying a direct instruction from what appeared to be her employer. It meant risking the visa status that allowed her to support her family, the career she had built with years of dedicated service. The weight of these responsibilities pushed against her growing alarm, tipping the balance toward compliance even as every instinct urged retreat. She opened the door. The office beyond was sparse, functional, stripped of personality. A desk, 3 chairs, a filing cabinet, a water cooler in the corner. No plants, no photographs, no corporate artwork on the walls. A man in a charcoal suit sat behind the desk, his features arranged in an expression of bureaucratic neutrality. He did not stand as she entered, merely gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Ms. Mercado, please sit." There was something rehearsed about his manner, a performance of authority rather than its natural embodiment. His desk held a single file folder, conspicuously positioned, her name visible on the tab. "I understand there's a uniform compliance review," Danny said, her voice steady despite the unease now pulsing through her veins like a second heartbeat. "Among other matters," the man replied, opening the folder with deliberate slowness. "We've received some concerning reports about your relationship with certain VIP clients." He removed a photograph, placing it on the desk between them. Danny recognized it immediately, herself and Sheikh Khaled at the private lounge in Abu Dhabi, the night of the proposal. They were seated at the table, his expression intent, her posture attentive but professional. The angle suggested it had been taken surreptitiously, perhaps by security camera or a staff member. "This appears to show a breach of company protocol," the man continued, his tone suggesting conclusions already reached. "Private dinners with clients are strictly prohibited without prior authorization." Danny felt a cold clarity descend, the kind that comes when suspicion crystallizes into certainty. This wasn't about uniforms. This was about the Sheikh's wounded pride, his need to reassert control after her rejection. "I was on duty," she replied, maintaining the composure that had become her professional armor. "The invitation came through official channels. I attended in my capacity as cabin service director, as my response to the invitation clearly stated." A flicker of something, annoyance, recalculation, passed across the man's face. "And you declined a personal invitation from the Sheikh during this meeting, did you not?" The question confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't HR. This was something else entirely, a performance designed to intimidate, to establish wrongdoing where none existed. "I maintained appropriate professional boundaries," she said carefully, "as required by Elite Air's code of conduct." The man closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Ms. Mercado, let's dispense with the pretense. You've placed yourself in a precarious position. Sheikh Khaled is not merely a VIP client. He's a major stakeholder in aviation infrastructure throughout the Emirates. His dissatisfaction has consequences." "That sounds like a threat," Danny observed, her voice quieter but no less firm. "A reality check," he corrected, standing abruptly. "One that your situation demands." These simulated authority scenarios exploit deeply ingrained patterns of compliance, explains social psychologist Dr. Maya Patel. Most people are conditioned to defer to perceived institutional authority, especially in high-stakes environments where livelihoods are at risk. The target isn't responding to the individual making demands, but to the constructed framework of authority they appear to represent. This is how otherwise intelligent, perceptive individuals can be maneuvered into increasingly dangerous situations. As Danny rose to leave, the office door opened behind her. Two men entered, broad-shouldered, expressionless, their suits unable to fully disguise the muscular builds beneath. Their presence blocked the exit, transforming what had been uncomfortable into something undeniably dangerous. "Sheikh Al-Nwaymi would like to speak with you," the man behind the desk announced. "Privately." The word privately hung in the air like a sentence, its implications expanding to fill the sterile space. Danny's mind raced, calculating options that dwindled with each passing second. The building was unfamiliar territory. The elevator required a keycard for operation. Her phone was in her purse, but any call would take precious minutes to connect, to explain, to bring help. Minutes she clearly didn't have. "I need to inform my supervisor of any schedule changes," she said, reaching for her purse with deliberate casualness. "Company protocol." One of the men stepped forward, intercepting her movement. "Your supervisor has been informed," he said, his accent marking him as North African, perhaps Egyptian or Tunisian. "A car is waiting." In that moment, the full architecture of the trap revealed itself with terrifying clarity. There had never been a uniform review, never been an HR concern. There had only been this, a carefully constructed scenario designed to isolate her, to create a veneer of legitimacy around what was essentially an abduction. And she had walked into it willingly, constrained by the very professional conscientiousness that had shaped her career. "If you'd come this way, please," the first man said, moving toward a side door she hadn't noticed until now. Danny felt her body responding automatically, muscle memory from years of following instructions, of navigating hierarchies with polite deference. 3 steps toward the door before her mind reasserted control, before the survival instinct sparked through the haze of conditioned compliance. "I'm sorry, but I need to leave," she said, turning back toward the main entrance. "My fiancé is expecting me for lunch. He knows exactly where I am." The lie emerged with surprising conviction, a desperate improvisation that might create just enough doubt to change their calculations. The men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "The Sheikh merely wishes to speak with you," the one by the side door insisted. "To clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding. It would be unwise to decline." The underlying message was unmistakable. She could go voluntarily, maintaining the illusion of choice, or they could dispense with the pretense entirely. Danny understood the calculus of power at work. They preferred compliance to force, preferred her to participate in her own captivity rather than create complications that might leave evidence, witnesses, questions. Her hand moved to the small microphone concealed in the sleeve of her uniform, a standard safety feature for cabin crew, designed to record passenger incidents or emergency instructions. With a subtle gesture honed through safety drills, she activated it, the small click inaudible to anyone but her. "Very well," she said, her voice steady despite the fear now coursing through her system. "I'll speak with him." They escorted her through the side door, down a service corridor, and into a freight elevator that descended to an underground parking level. A black SUV with tinted windows waited, engine running, driver invisible behind the darkened glass. One man opened the rear door, gesturing for her to enter. As she stepped toward the vehicle, Danny whispered into her sleeve, her lips barely moving, "Marco, if you hear this, I kept my promise." The microphone captured her words, storing them in the uniform's integrated safety system, a system designed to protect passengers, now serving as her final, desperate attempt to leave a trace, to create a record of what was happening. The SUV door closed behind her with the solid thunk of expensive engineering, sealing her into a darkness that smelled of leather and masculine cologne. Through the tinted windows, she watched the city recede, the gleaming towers of Abu Dhabi shrinking in the distance as they drove toward the desert. The landscape outside transformed, urban density giving way to scattered developments, then to the empty expanse of sand that had existed long before the Emirates' meteoric rise and would remain long after. The perfect place for someone to disappear without trace. In the crew apartment in Dubai, Marco Reyes paced the small living room, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. 6 calls to Danny, all unanswered. 3 hours since her cryptic text about the HR meeting in Khalifa City. His thumb hovered over the screen, debating whether to call her roommate again or to take more direct action. The construction site supervisor had already called twice, asking about his absence from the morning shift. The missed wages would hurt their carefully managed budget, but the growing knot of dread in his stomach made such concerns seem trivial. The car continued its journey into emptiness, carrying Danny toward a confrontation from which the outline had promised she would not return. The ring she had left on the tray had already set in motion a chain of consequences that would transform her from a person into a problem, from a woman of principle into an inconvenient variable requiring elimination. The most terrifying aspect of these situations is how systems of power can mobilize against individuals who dare to say no, observes human rights attorney Leila Navarro. The resources deployed, fake offices, multiple personnel, vehicles, surveillance, represent an overwhelming force directed at a single person whose only crime was maintaining her dignity and autonomy. It's a stark reminder of how thin the veneer of security truly is for those who exist at the margins of these societies, regardless of their professional status or apparent integration. If this stark portrayal of vulnerability in the face of unchecked power resonates with you, subscribe now to follow the unfolding tragedy of Danielle Mercado. A woman whose simple refusal set in motion a disappearance that would leave barely a ripple in the gleaming surface of Abu Dhabi's expatriate world. In our next segment, we witness the desperate search for truth against a system designed to erase inconvenient questions and the people who dare to ask them. The Abu Dhabi police station in Al Khalidia stood as a monument to bureaucratic efficiency. Gleaming marble floors, digital queue systems, officers in crisp uniforms processing paperwork with the detached professionalism of bank tellers. Marco Reyes sat on a molded plastic chair in the waiting area, his construction boots incongruous against the immaculate flooring, dust from the work site still clinging to his jeans despite his effort to clean up before coming. 26 hours since Danny had disappeared. 26 hours of unanswered calls, of growing dread, of increasingly desperate inquiries to her airline, her roommate, her friends. 26 hours that had aged him visibly, etching lines of worry around his eyes, deepening the furrow between his brows into a permanent mark of distress. His number appeared on the digital display above the reception desk. 47. He approached the counter, where a young Emirati officer regarded him with polite disinterest. "I need to report a missing person," Marco said, the words thick in his throat. "My fiancé, Danielle Mercado. She's been missing since yesterday morning." The officer's fingers moved across his keyboard, entering the information with practiced efficiency. Nationality: Filipino. She's a flight attendant with elite air services. A subtle shift in the officer's demeanor, almost imperceptible, but Marco had lived in the Emirates long enough to recognize the recalibration that occurred when certain nationalities were mentioned, the subtle downgrading of priority. "When did you last have contact with her?" "She texted me yesterday at 9:30 a.m. She was going to an HR meeting in Khalifa City, Building C. She never returned. Her phone goes straight to voicemail." The officer continued typing, his expression unchanged. "Has she missed work?" "The airline says she's AWOL. But that's not possible. She's never missed a shift in 6 years. Something's happened to her." "Any history of mental health issues? Financial problems? Relationship difficulties?" The questions came with bureaucratic detachment, a checklist being methodically completed. Marco felt a surge of frustration, quickly suppressed. Anger wouldn't help find Danny. No, none of those. She is stable, responsible. Something is wrong. Someone has taken her. At this, the officer looked up, his expression sharpening slightly. "You're alleging abduction? Do you have evidence to support this claim?" Marco hesitated. The truth about Sheikh Khalid's proposal, about Danny's refusal, about the subtle warnings and professional retaliation that had followed, sounded incredible even to his own ears. Without proof, without witnesses, it was his word against one of the most powerful men in Abu Dhabi. A dangerous accusation that could cost him his own visa, his job, perhaps even his freedom if it were deemed defamatory. "She would never disappear voluntarily," he said finally. "That's all the evidence I need." The officer completed the form, his keystrokes a soft percussion in the quiet space. "We'll file a report," he said, his tone making clear how little priority this would receive. Standard procedure is to wait 48 hours for adults with no evidence of foul play. Many expatriates leave voluntarily without informing employers or associates. The word associates hung in the air, a deliberate recategorization of Marco's relationship with Danny, a subtle diminishment of his concern from that of a fiancé to that of a mere acquaintance. He received a printout with a case number, a formality that promised procedure without action. The initial response to missing persons reports reflects existing social hierarchies and power structures, explains criminologist Dr. Fatima Al-Mansouri. In Gulf states, these hierarchies are complex, incorporating nationality, social class, employment sector, and gender. Reports concerning domestic workers, service personnel, or certain nationalities often receive less immediate attention, operating under institutional assumptions that these individuals are more likely to have left voluntarily or to have violated visa terms. These assumptions create critical delays in the crucial first hours of a disappearance. As Marco left the police station, the afternoon call to prayer echoed across the city. A haunting, beautiful sound that had once represented the cultural tapestry he and Danny had embraced as part of their expatriate experience. Now it felt like a reminder of his outsider status, of the vast gulf between his desperate concern and the implacable system he was attempting to navigate. His phone vibrated with a text from his site supervisor. Either report tomorrow or consider your contract terminated. The message was not unkind, merely factual. The construction industry operated on tight margins and tighter deadlines. Workers were replaceable. Progress was not. In his pocket, Marco carried Danny's engagement ring, recovered from their apartment where she kept the duplicate she'd purchased after leaving the original on the Sheikh's dinner tray. The metal was warm against his fingers, a small circle of silver that represented everything they had planned together. The wedding in Cebu next year, the small house they hoped to build, the children they had named in late-night conversations. Dreams that now felt like vapor, dispersing in the harsh light of her absence. Meanwhile, across the city, Sheikh Khaled Al-Muaimi stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office in the family's corporate headquarters, watching Abu Dhabi shimmer in the afternoon heat. Behind him, a press conference was being prepared. Microphones arranged, lighting adjusted, PR staff reviewing talking points for the announcement of the Saudi merger. $2 billion of combined assets, a strategic partnership that would reshape the region's energy landscape. His cousin Layla entered without knocking, her Hermes briefcase clutched like a shield, her expression carefully neutral. "The Saudis have confirmed attendance," she said without preamble. "Prince Abdullah himself will sign. We need absolute perfection today." Khaled nodded, his reflection in the glass revealing nothing of his inner thoughts. "Everything is arranged." Layla studied him, her gaze sharp beneath the elegant frame of her hijab. "Is it? No loose ends?" The question hung between them, its real meaning clear. Khaled turned from the window, his expression a masterpiece of composed dignity. The grieving widower, the visionary businessman, the pillar of society preparing to take his family's legacy to new heights. "She's contained," he said simply. "No recordings, no witnesses." Layla nodded once, satisfied. "The press will ask about marriage rumors. The Saudis value stability, family structure. Your response?" "I remain devoted to my late wife's memory," he replied, the words practiced perfect. "When the time is right, I will honor her wish that I find happiness again, with someone suitable." The emphasis on the word suitable was subtle but unmistakable, an acknowledgement of the lesson learned, the error corrected. Layla's approval was equally understated, a slight relaxation of her shoulders, a small nod of satisfaction. The machine of power and wealth would continue its smooth operation, undisturbed by inconvenient desires or troublesome refusals. Power doesn't just protect itself through overt violence, notes political scientist Dr. Amina Khoury. It sanitizes its actions through language, through performance, through the creation of acceptable narratives that mask uncomfortable realities. The grieving widower narrative serves multiple functions. It generates sympathy, establishes moral character, and creates a framework where certain actions become unthinkable, beyond suspicion. Who would question a man still honoring his deceased wife's memory? In a nondescript building on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, Rashid sat reviewing the security footage from the operation. The surveillance had been comprehensive, the extraction clean. No witnesses, no digital trail, no evidence that could connect Sheikh Khaled to the disappearance of a flight attendant who had dared to refuse him. His phone rang, a secure line used only for the most sensitive communications. "It's done," he said simply. "No complications." The voice on the other end, one of the men who had escorted Danny from the fake HR office, was equally terse. "The cleanup is complete. No recoverable evidence." Rashid ended the call, his expression unchanging as he deleted the security footage, wiping the final digital record of Danielle Mercado's last moments. In his world, people disappeared with surprising regularity. Inconvenient witnesses, problematic employees, individuals who represented complications to the smooth operation of power. The machinery of elimination was well-oiled, practiced, invisible to those who benefited from its efficiency. What had happened to Danny in those final hours would never be documented in any official record. The outline had suggested an abandoned oil storage facility. Accelerant, fire, the most efficient means of eliminating evidence when a body must never be found. The reality was likely even more clinical, more impersonal. A problem solved with professional detachment, the human element reduced to a logistical challenge successfully overcome. The most chilling aspect of these disappearances is their administrative quality, observes forensic investigator Dr. Jonathan Chun. They're handled like corporate operations with planning, resource allocation, risk assessment, and after-action reports. This bureaucratization of violence creates psychological distance for all involved, transforming a human life into a project to be managed to completion. In Manila, Danny's sister Nina sat in her university dormitory, staring at her phone with growing dread. 3 days since her last contact with Danny. 3 days of unanswered messages, of platitudes from the airline, of vague reassurances from the Philippine consulate in Abu Dhabi. The encrypted voice memo Danny had sent remained unopened in her secure email, a digital time capsule she hadn't yet found the courage to access. Sensing instinctively that its contents would transform worry into certainty, hope into grief. Back in Dubai, Marco returned to their small apartment, the space haunted by Danny's absence. Her books on the shelf, her favorite coffee mug in the dish rack, her scent still lingering on the pillowcase. He had called everyone, exhausted every avenue available to a man of his limited resources and connections. The Philippine consulate had taken his statement but offered little hope. These cases rarely go anywhere. The authorities have significant discretion in how they're investigated. The unspoken reality hung in the air, that some lives were deemed more valuable than others, that some disappearances warranted front-page coverage and government intervention, while others were relegated to bureaucratic notations and private grief. A Filipina flight attendant, however dedicated and beloved, did not register as a priority in a system designed to protect power rather than people. As Marco collapsed onto their bed, emotionally and physically exhausted, a knock at the door jolted him back to alertness. Hope surged, irrational but unstoppable. Perhaps Danny had returned, had lost her phone, had been caught in some bureaucratic mishap that explained everything. Instead, he opened the door to find a courier, who handed him a plain manila envelope before departing without a word. Inside, a one-way ticket to Manila, departure scheduled for the following morning, and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Forget her, or you vanish too. The threat was as elegant as it was explicit. A demonstration of reach, of resources, of the ability to locate him, to enter his building, to monitor his movements. The message clear. There would be no investigation, no justice, no closure. Only silence or the extension of Danny's fate to include him as well. Marco stood in the doorway, the ticket clutched in his trembling hand, faced with an impossible choice: to abandon the search for the woman he loved, or to join her in disappearance. To preserve her memory, or to become another statistic, another whispered cautionary tale among the expatriate community. The system that had taken Danny now offered him a cruel mercy. Survival at the cost of surrender, life at the price of silence. These forced choices represent the ultimate expression of power imbalance, explains human rights advocate Maria Gonzalez. The victim is made complicit in their own oppression, forced to participate in the erasure of truth in exchange for continued existence. It's a particularly insidious form of control, one that doesn't just eliminate a problem but conscripts survivors into maintaining the silence that allows such systems to persist. At his merger celebration that evening, Sheikh Khalid raised a crystal flute of non-alcoholic champagne, toasting the Saudi dignitaries and business partners gathered in the opulent ballroom of the Emirates Palace Hotel. Camera flashes captured his dignified smile, his impeccable tailoring, his aura of benevolent authority. Financial correspondents noted his remarkable composure and visionary leadership, unaware that beneath the performance lay a man who had orchestrated a woman's disappearance with the same meticulous attention he brought to business acquisitions. During the dinner service, a Filipina server with long black hair approached his table. For a fraction of a second, Khalid's composure slipped. A barely perceptible flinch, a momentary flash of something like recognition or guilt, before the mask re-established itself. Later that night, alone in his Saudiyat Island villa, He would make an anonymous donation to a Manila orphanage, the transaction routed through multiple shell companies, the recipient listed in internal records as Danielle Mercado Memorial Fund. Not guilt, exactly. Men like Khaled rarely experience such ordinary emotion, but perhaps a recognition of waste, of potential unfulfilled, of beauty extinguished unnecessarily. The donation was not atonement but aftercare, a small adjustment to the cosmic ledger, meaningless to the woman whose life had been erased but significant to the man who needed to maintain his self-image as fundamentally reasonable, even generous, despite the occasional hard decisions required by his position. If this unflinching examination of power, privilege, and the disposability of certain lives has shaken you, prepare for our next segment, where we follow Marco's impossible choice and discover how Danny's final message, preserved in her sister's care, becomes the one thing her killers couldn't erase. Subscribe now to witness the conclusion of this tragic story and the small, fragile justice that emerges from the silence one woman's courage left behind. The remote desert compound near Al Ain existed in governmental limbo, officially a decommissioned military storage facility, unofficially a site for matters requiring absolute discretion. Surrounded by 8-foot concrete walls topped with razor wire, its location carefully omitted from satellite imagery through arrangements with technology companies that understood the value of cooperation with certain interests. The compound sat like a scar on the desert landscape, its sand-colored buildings nearly invisible against the surrounding terrain, a place designed to swallow secrets without trace. Inside a windowless room, Danielle Mercado sat on a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor. 72 hours since her abduction. 72 hours of captivity marked by a methodical rotation of guards, regular meals of flatbread and water, and a silence broken only by the intermittent arrival of Rashid, Sheikh Khaled's head of security. Her navy uniform, once a symbol of professional pride, was wrinkled and stained. Her neat bun had collapsed into a tangled cascade, but her posture remained straight, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. The psychological stamina displayed by hostages in prolonged captivity situations reveals something profound about human resilience, explains trauma psychologist Dr. Nadia Hussein. When all external control is stripped away, many individuals retreat to an inner fortress, a core of identity and principle that captors cannot breach. This psychological resistance often becomes the last, most meaningful form of autonomy available to them. Rashid entered the room for what would be their final conversation, his expression as impassive as it had been during each previous interrogation. He placed a document on the small metal table between them, along with a pen whose weight suggested expensive engineering. "The situation has become untenable," he said, his voice carrying neither cruelty nor compassion. "A final opportunity is being offered. $5 million. A new identity. A comfortable life away from here." He pushed the document forward. "You sign, confirming a romantic relationship initiated by you. You accept the settlement. You disappear to Thailand, to Mexico, wherever you wish. No contact with family, with your fiancé. A new beginning." Danny looked at the document, the dense legal text swimming before her tired eyes. The offer remained the same, only the packaging had changed. No longer a proposal of marriage, but a financial settlement designed to erase her. The outcome identical. Her transformation from a woman with history, with connections, with identity, into something owned and controlled. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Rashid's expression didn't change. "Then you disappear anyway, but without the money, without the comfort, without the choice." The threat was delivered with the same administrative detachment he might use to explain a corporate restructuring, a simple matter of resource allocation and problem solving. Danny looked at the pen, at the document, at the hand offering a bargain that wasn't a bargain at all, but a final attempt to secure her compliance in her own erasure. "I'd rather be dead than a lie," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion, the fear, the growing certainty of her fate. The words emerged not as bravado but as simple truth, a recognition that some compromises corroded the soul beyond recovery, that some prices were too high regardless of the consequences of refusal. Rashid studied her for a long moment, his expression suggesting not anger but a kind of professional reassessment. He had encountered resistance before, from competitors, from political opponents, from various obstacles to his employer's will. But rarely had he seen it manifested with such quiet certainty, such absence of theatrics. He collected the document and pen, tucking them into his jacket with meticulous precision. "Arrangements will be made," he said simply, and left. This moment of final refusal represents the purest expression of moral autonomy, notes ethicist Dr. Ibrahim Al-Farsi. When all external protections have been stripped away, when consequences are at their most dire, the choice to maintain principle becomes almost transcendent, a final assertion that some core of personhood remains inviolable, even in the face of overwhelming power. What followed would never appear in any official record, would never be acknowledged by any authority, would exist only in the memory of those who performed the grim mechanics of disappearance. After nightfall, Danny was transported from the compound, the black SUV following remote desert tracks to an abandoned oil storage facility in a region where corporate development had been planned and then abandoned, leaving industrial ruins to be reclaimed by sand and silence. The violence was not born of passion or cruelty, but of cold logistical necessity, a problem requiring resolution, a loose end requiring trimming. The physical details matter less than the implacable machinery of power that rendered them inevitable. What matters is that Danielle Mercado, who had lived with dignity and died with principle intact, was reduced to ash and memory, her remains disposed of with industrial efficiency that left no trace, no evidence, no body for mourning or justice. The industrial disposal of remains represents the ultimate bureaucratization of violence, explains forensic anthropologist Dr. Sophia Chun. It transforms murder from an act of passion or even calculated elimination into something more akin to waste management, a technical problem to be solved with appropriate methodology. This administrative approach to disappearance has been perfected in regions where powerful interests require absolute discretion. The official narrative assembled with practiced efficiency. Elite Air Services issued a terse statement declaring Danielle Mercado resigned without notice, a common enough occurrence in the transient world of expatriate employment to raise few questions. Her personnel file was annotated with a single line, "Terminated job abandonment," the administrative equivalent of a period at the end of a sentence, closing a chapter without explanation. The Abu Dhabi police closed their missing persons case with equal brevity. Investigation suspended, no evidence of foul play. The file was archived in digital limbo, technically accessible but practically forgotten. One more statistic in the quiet churn of expatriate workers who appeared and disappeared with the rhythms of global labor markets. The media, attuned to the subtle currents of power and influence in the Emirates, maintained complete silence. No headlines, no human interest stories, no questions about a Filipina flight attendant whose disappearance might have warranted coverage in a different context, involving different parties. The machinery of public narrative hummed along undisturbed, focusing instead on the landmark merger between Al Nuaimi Holdings and Saudi energy partners, a $2 billion deal that promised to reshape the regional economic landscape for generations. Media silence in these cases is rarely the result of explicit censorship, notes journalism ethics professor Dr. Fatima Rahman. Rather, it emerges from a complex ecosystem of self-regulation, implicit understanding of which stories invite scrutiny and which invite consequence. Reporters develop an instinctive sense of which boundaries can be pushed and which are electrified. In environments where press credentials, visas, and access all depend on remaining in good standing with authorities, this self-preservation instinct becomes professionally adaptive. In their crew apartment, Leah Rodriguez, Danny's roommate, packed her colleagues' belongings into cardboard boxes with quiet efficiency. The airline's HR department had instructed her to clear the space for a new crew member arriving the following week. As she folded Danny's clothes, cataloged her books, wrapped the framed photograph of her family in bacolod, Leah fought back tears. She had known Danny for 3 years, had shared meals and confidences, and the peculiar intimacy of expatriate life far from home. She didn't believe for a moment that Danny had simply abandoned her job, her fiancé, her carefully constructed life without a word. But she also understood the unwritten rules of survival in Dubai, the boundaries of permissible questions, the dangers of pushing against narratives established by those with power to reshape reality. She would ship Danny's belongings to the address in Bacolod, would light a candle at the Filipino Catholic Church on her next day off, would preserve her friend's memory in the private sanctuary of her heart. But she would not ask questions. She would not rock the boat. She would continue flying the routes assigned, serving the VIPs designated, maintaining the pleasant professional demeanor required. Because Leah had responsibilities too, parents who needed support, siblings in school, a future built on the fragile foundation of continued employment in a system where complicity and survival were often indistinguishable. Marco Reyes stood at the departure gate at Dubai International Airport, the one-way ticket to Manila clutched in his hand, Danny's duplicate engagement ring heavy in his pocket. Around him, travelers moved with the purposeful chaos of any international terminal. Families reuniting, businesspeople checking devices, the steady flow of humanity in transit. Ordinary life continuing with cruel indifference to his private apocalypse. His choice had been made not in a moment of courage or cowardice, but in the cold clarity of dawn as he had stared at the ticket and the threat that accompanied it. To stay would be to disappear as Danny had disappeared. To leave was to abandon any hope of uncovering the truth, of seeking justice, of honoring her memory through persistence. Yet what justice could be found against forces capable of erasing a person so completely? What truth could be established when every institutional avenue was blocked, every potential witness silenced by the same fears now forcing his departure? The coercion of loved ones represents a particularly insidious form of control, observes conflict resolution specialist Dr. Amir Khan. It transforms personal connection from a source of strength into a vulnerability to be exploited. By threatening Marco, those responsible for Danielle's disappearance demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of leverage, forcing complicity not through direct intimidation, but through the manipulation of attachment and responsibility. As the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, Marco joined the queue, his movements automatic, his mind elsewhere. The manila envelope with its explicit threat had been burned, the ashes flushed away, but its message remained burned into his consciousness. Forget her, or you vanish too. A choice that was no choice at all. Merely the recognition that his death would do nothing to honor Danny's memory, would serve no purpose beyond satisfying the same machinery of power that had claimed her. He would board the plane not to forget, but to remember. Not to abandon the truth, but to preserve it. Not as an act of surrender, but as a strategic retreat to a place where he might find a different kind of justice, a different avenue for preserving the truth of who Danielle Mercado had been and what had been done to her. As the plane lifted off from Dubai soil, banking over the Persian Gulf whose waters now concealed countless secrets, Marco clutched Danny's ring in his palm like a talisman. The metal warmed against his skin, a small circle of silver that now represented not just love and commitment, but memory and witness. The tangible proof that Danielle Mercado had existed, had loved, had stood on principle even when that stand cost her everything. If you're struggling to comprehend the brutal reality of what happens when ordinary people collide with systems of unchecked power, you're not alone. The story of Danielle Mercado is not just a tragedy. It's a window into the shadow world that exists beneath the gleaming surface of global cities, where some lives are deemed expendable in service to wealth and influence. Subscribe now for our final act, where we discover how truth, though buried, refuses to remain silent, and how Danny's final act of courage creates ripples that even the most powerful cannot control. 1 year later, the small chapel of Santo Niño in Cebu glowed with afternoon light filtering through stained glass, casting pools of blue and gold across the worn wooden pews. Marco Reyes knelt in the back row, his construction worker's hands clasped in prayer, his expression one of composed grief rather than the raw agony that had marked his return to the Philippines 12 months earlier. Sunday service had ended hours ago, the church now empty save for a few elderly women lighting candles near the altar and Marco's solitary figure, keeping his weekly vigil. In the year since his forced departure from Dubai, Marco had rebuilt some semblance of life from the wreckage of loss. He had found work as a site engineer for a local development firm, had rented a small apartment overlooking the harbor, had established the quiet routines of survival. But each Sunday, without fail, he came to this chapel where he and Danny had planned to marry, placed a white orchid before the small, unofficial memorial plaque, he had installed with the priest's compassionate permission, and sat with her memory. The plaque bore no dates, no mention of Dubai or disappearance or the true circumstances of her absence. Simply, Danielle Mercado, beloved daughter, sister, fiancé. I'd rather be dead than a lie. The final phrase, reported to him by Nina, Danny's sister, after she had finally found the courage to listen to the encrypted voice memo, had become his anchor, the distillation of everything he had loved about the woman now gone. Her moral clarity, her quiet courage, her refusal to be diminished even when that refusal cost her everything. The act of creating unofficial memorials serves profound psychological and social functions, explains grief researcher Dr. Maria Concepcion. In cases where official acknowledgement is impossible or denied, these physical spaces of remembrance become acts of resistance, assertions that the erased person existed, mattered, deserves to be remembered. They transform private grief into public witness, even on the smallest scale. Marco reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the silver ring he carried everywhere, the metal worn smooth from constant handling. He had considered many times what to do with this last physical connection to Danny, whether to bury it, to keep it in a box of memories, to wear it himself as a reminder. But none of these options felt right, felt adequate to the weight of significance the simple band now carried. As he sat in the chapel's hushed quiet, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A call from Nina, now in her final year of journalism studies at the University of the Philippines. He answered softly, mindful of the sacred space. "It's happened?" Nina said without preamble, her voice taut with a complex mixture of vindication and renewed grief. The voice note, "It's everywhere." Marco closed his eyes, absorbing the significance of her words. For months, they had debated what to do with Danny's final testimony. The encrypted recording she had created as insurance, as witness, as proof that whatever happened to her was the direct result of her refusal of Sheikh Khalid's proposal. Nina had argued for release, for public exposure. Marco had counseled caution, fearful of the same forces that had taken Danny reaching across continents to silence her sister as well. In the end, the decision had been made not in a moment of courage but of outrage. Nina had been researching a story on disappearances of overseas Filipino workers when she discovered a pattern. 3 other women gone missing from Gulf states in the past decade, all after encounters with powerful men, all cases closed without resolution. The story had been killed by her editor, citing diplomatic sensitivity. That night, she had uploaded Danny's voice note to multiple secure servers, sending copies to international human rights organizations, labor rights advocates, and journalists known for covering workers' rights issues. "How bad is it?" Marco asked, already calculating risks, contingencies, the need to move Nina to a safer location. "It's viral," she replied. "The major outlets won't touch it directly, but it's all over social media. #IfIDisappear is trending. People are sharing their own stories. Embassies are issuing statements denying involvement. Al-Nuaimi Holdings has released a formal denial. The official denials had come with predictable swiftness and coordinated messaging. UAE authorities expressed concern, while emphasizing the lack of evidence connecting any official entity to Ms. Mercado's disappearance. Elite Air Services reiterated their position that she had resigned without notice, a common occurrence in the industry. Sheikh Khalid's spokesperson issued a terse statement. Sheikh Al-Nuaimi barely knew Ms. Mercado beyond her professional capacity as cabin crew. These allegations are categorically false and potentially defamatory. The institutional response to exposed wrongdoing follows predictable patterns, notes crisis management expert Dr. Sanjay Mehta. Denial, minimization, questioning of evidence, and often subtle discrediting of the victim. The strategy relies on the public's short attention span and the difficulty of maintaining outrage without continuous new information. In cases involving the disappeared, this strategy is particularly effective. The primary witness is, by definition, unavailable to counter the narrative. But something had shifted in the year since Danny's disappearance. A growing global awareness of the vulnerability of migrant workers, an increasing willingness to question the impunity of wealth and power, a social media ecosystem that could amplify voices once easily silenced. Danny's voice, clear, steady, prophetic in its simplicity, resonated beyond the specific circumstances of her case. If I disappear, it's because I said no. Women across continents recognized the universal truth in those words, the danger inherent in refusal, the price often exacted for maintaining boundaries against those accustomed to compliance. Overseas workers identified with her vulnerability, her precarious navigation of systems designed to extract labor while minimizing rights and protections. Her voice, once silenced, now echoed in a chorus of recognition and shared experience. The repercussions moved like seismic waves through the carefully constructed edifices of power and influence. The Saudi partners in Sheikh Khalid's energy merger, though making no public statements, quietly began distancing themselves, rescheduling meetings, delaying further integration of operations, expressing renewed need for due diligence in carefully worded communications. The narrative of the honorable widower, the visionary business leader, had acquired a shadow that conservative investors found troubling, regardless of proof or official position. In high-level business circles, particularly in regions where reputation and honor carry significant weight, even the suggestion of impropriety can have material consequences, explains financial analyst Tariq Al-Youssef. It's rarely about moral judgment, rather it's a cold calculation of risk and association. The question becomes not, is this true? But, does this association potentially compromise our position or reputation? Damage occurs not through legal mechanisms but through the subtle withdrawal of trust, which in these circles is the actual currency of power. Marco listened as Nina outlined security precautions, legal considerations, the support being offered by international organizations now involved in the case. The conversation was surreal in its practical discussion of matters that could never restore Danny to life, could never truly deliver justice for what had been taken. Yet there was something poignantly appropriate about this development. Danny, who had lived with such quiet integrity, now becoming a catalyst for conversations about systemic abuse and institutional silence. After ending the call, Marco remained in the chapel, watching as the afternoon light shifted, the colored patterns from the stained glass sliding across the worn stone floor. He removed Danny's ring from his pocket, the silver catching the light as he turned it between his fingers. The decision he had struggled with for months suddenly clarified, presenting itself not as a choice but as an inevitability, a completion. That evening, Marco stood on a quiet stretch of beach outside Cebu City, the setting sun transforming the water into sheets of hammered gold. In his palm, Danny's ring caught the dying light, the simple band representing everything they had planned together and everything that had been stolen. For a moment, he considered the expected gesture, the dramatic casting of the ring into the waves, the symbolic release, the cinematic closure. But that wasn't Danny's story. Hers wasn't a tale of surrender or symbolic gestures. It was a story of principled stance, of refusing to be diminished, of insisting on truth even when truth carried a terrible price. To throw her ring into the sea would be to participate in her erasure, to suggest that memory could or should be discarded, that what happened could ever be resolved through ritual or release. Instead, Marco removed the silver chain from around his neck, a gift from his mother when he had first left for Dubai years earlier, blessed by the local priest for protection. He threaded Danny's ring onto the chain, the silver band sliding down to rest against his heart as he refastened the clasp. Not hidden, not discarded, but carried forward. A weight transformed into witness, grief transmuted into purpose. The decision to keep physical tokens of the departed close to the body represents a profound psychological choice, observes grief counselor Dr. Elena Santos. It transforms loss from an absence to be overcome into a presence to be integrated, a recognition that certain connections are not meant to be severed, but rather incorporated into our ongoing identity. In cases of unjust loss, these tokens often become talismans not just of memory but of purpose, physical reminders of unfinished business, of commitments that transcend death. In the weeks and months that followed, Danny's voice note continued to reverberate through increasingly wide circles, from social media activism to formal inquiries by international labor organizations, from diplomatic discussions to quiet conversations among expatriate workers across the Gulf region. No single authority acknowledged responsibility. No individual was held accountable in any court of law. The machinery of power adjusted, adapted, continued its operation with barely a pause. But something had shifted, however slightly. Questions previously unasked were now being voiced. Connections previously unnoticed were being mapped. Patterns previously dismissed as coincidence were being recognized as systemic. Danielle Mercado had been erased as a person but had become something perhaps more powerful. A symbol, a catalyst, a question that refused to be answered with silence. Sheikh Khalid al-Nwaymi gradually withdrew from public life, citing a desire for privacy and reflection, as he focused on family interests and philanthropic endeavors. His profile in business publications diminished, his appearances at economic forums ceased, his name appearing primarily in connection with charitable donations to educational initiatives in Southeast Asia. Whether this retreat represented consequence, conscience, or simple strategic adjustment remained known only to him. On the anniversary of Danny's disappearance, Marco stood again on the beach outside Cebu, the silver ring resting against his heart beneath his shirt. The setting sun painted the horizon in shades of fire and gold, the eternal rhythm of day's end continuing with indifferent beauty. He thought of the official narrative, that Danny had simply left, had walked away, had chosen to disappear without trace or explanation. He thought of the truth, her capture, her refusal, her final principled stand against forces that viewed her personhood as negotiable, her life as expendable. They tried to erase her name, he whispered to the wind and waves. But some silences echo louder than screams. And somewhere, in the space between justice and memory, between loss and purpose, Danielle Mercado's voice continued to resonate. In the growing awareness of expatriate vulnerability, in the quiet conversations among flight attendants about establishing emergency protocols, in the increased scrutiny of disappearances once easily dismissed. Her story had not ended with her erasure, but had expanded into something larger than her individual tragedy. A small, persistent light illuminating corners of power previously shrouded in comfortable darkness. The silver ring Marco carried against his heart was more than a memorial to lost love. It was evidence of existence, proof of principle, testament to a truth that powerful interests had spent millions to conceal. In a world where some lives were deemed expendable in service to wealth and status, Danny's final choice, to remain true to herself even at ultimate cost, represented not just personal courage but revolutionary defiance. They had taken her life, her future, her very body, but they had failed to take her truth. And in that failure lay the seeds of their ultimate limitation, the recognition that some things remained beyond the reach of even the most absolute power. Some voices, though silenced, refused to stay silent. Some stories, though erased from official record, continued to be told. Some rings, though left behind on a tray, found their way back to bear witness. In examining cases like Danielle Mercado's, we confront uncomfortable truths about global power structures and the uneven distribution of justice, reflects human rights attorney James Morrison. But we also glimpse something profoundly hopeful, the persistent human capacity for moral courage, the refusal to be defined by systems of oppression, the way individual acts of principle can eventually catalyze collective recognition and change. These stories remind us that while power can eliminate people, it cannot so easily eliminate the truth they stood for. That truth has a way of returning, of insisting on being heard, of finding unexpected channels when conventional paths are blocked. Next time you see a private jet gliding to a stop on a desert runway, a uniformed flight attendant greeting passengers with professional courtesy, consider the invisible boundaries being navigated, the unwritten rules being observed, the quiet calculations being made by those whose smiles mask vulnerability. Consider the Danielis of the world, the ones who say no, who stand on principle, who pay terrible prices for dignity others take for granted. And remember, for every story that reaches the light, countless others remain buried in silence, in institutional indifference, in the measured calculation that some lives matter less than others. The true measure of any society lies not in its gleaming towers or economic indicators, but in what happens to those who dare to say no to power, and whether their voices, however silenced, eventually find ways to echo beyond their absence. If this exploration of power, vulnerability, and the cost of moral courage has affected you as deeply as it has affected me, please take a moment to share this story. Not because it will change systems overnight, but because awareness is the first step toward accountability, and memory is the first act of justice. Sometimes bearing witness is the only form of justice initially available, and from that witness, unexpected change can eventually emerge.